A lot of us consider moving abroad either to study or to work, and we usually do this at a time when we're somewhere in our 20s. And while it is one of the best times in life to make this move because we're young, we don't really have much to lose, and a lot of us don't really have a lot of responsibilities during this time, it can also be quite hard because we're in our 20s. And in this video, I'm going to talk about why moving abroad at this time when you're in your 20s can be quite hard. First, let me introduce you to the concept of variables of life. Life consists of different variables, right? And they're all kind of connected to each other. And in our 20s, we have a whole bunch of different variables, whether we choose to move abroad or not. You're figuring out your career, you're figuring out your social life, you're figuring out your personal life, like dating and finding a partner and all of that. You're also figuring out your changing relationships with your parents and other older family members. And then you're figuring out your whole living situation. So whether that's dealing with flatmates and roommates, you're setting up your apartment, buying furniture, figuring all that stuff out. And then this is also the time when a lot of us start earning money for the first time. So you're figuring out your financial situation and how to invest and all of that stuff. And finally, we're also trying to figure out how to build good habits, how to build good systems, because yeah, that's just really important. And then even mentally, a lot of things are going on in our 20s and we have to figure all of that stuff out too. So I consider all of these things like different variables, like different parts of the equation of life that we need to optimize. And all of these are pretty important because the things that we do in our 20s, they kind of set the stage for how we're going to live when we're in our 30s or 40s, or at least I like to think so. But the thing is, if you change one thing in one place, it's going to affect another variable somewhere else. So for example, you try to focus a little bit more on dating so that you feel a little less lonely. But then as a result, you feel less lonely, but you end up spending more money and your time, and then your career goals start to not be met, and that makes you a little stressed. So one thing is affecting another. But then if you focus on saving money, your financial goals may be met a little bit better, but then it starts affecting your social life and perhaps even your happiness because you have less money to spend on things that make you happy. But then if you prioritize your career so that you earn more money, that might affect your family and your personal life and also your social life. But then you're less stressed because you're earning more money and you have more money to do things. So you see that trying to optimize one variable definitely affects one or more other variables in your life too. It becomes a question of being able to balance all the different variables to find the most optimum kind of a balance basically in your life. At least for me, in my case, it sometimes feels like it's impossible to balance everything. And maybe it is, and that's what I'm trying to figure out right now. That's just how our 20s are. It's just a constant game of figuring out how to balance everything in life in a way that you don't burn out. Isn't it? Is that how our 20s are? I don't know. But yeah, it's normal to spend a lot of time and energy to learn how to figure out all of these things. But now imagine doing all of these things, but adding a whole bunch of extra variables in the mix, in addition to everything that's already there, which is already quite a lot. That's basically what happens when you move abroad or you immigrate abroad in your 20s. I've been living in France for 5 years now. I moved here when I was 21 years old. And these are some of the extra variables that I've noticed in the last 5 years of my life here as an expat or an immigrant or whatever you can call me. First and foremost, there's building and maintaining a community. You're far, far away from home, so you don't really have that constant support system anymore of your close friends and family. Having a support system is important because that's what gives us this sense of grounding and also a sense of emotional safety, which allows us to take more risks and just perform better in our lives and in our careers. But when you're living in a completely different country, you can find that the culture is so different that it's a little hard to connect with the locals, or it can be depending on where you're from. But essentially, that's a variable, just finding people to connect with. And often I've noticed that a lot of expats or immigrants end up connecting with other expats or other young foreigners because they're basically the ones that understand your lifestyle the most. Especially if you're someone who's come from a completely different culture. Like me, for example, I came from India to France, and those two cultures are very, very different. But then the thing with young foreigners like me is that especially at a young age, we're not exactly fixed about where we'll be. So that's one more variable, that you make a whole bunch of friends, but you're not really sure which of them are actually going to stay, which of them are going to leave. Or maybe you're not sure about whether you're going to stay or you're going to leave. So that's a whole variable there. I've had friends who I was super close with and then they just ended up leaving. And that always kind of sucks when that happens. And when you're a young person living abroad, that kind of thing tends to happen pretty often. I know that for me, especially in the beginning, I was surrounded by lots of really cool people because I just moved to business school, but I always felt a little bit lonely, and that was because The people that I was surrounded by, I hadn't really known them for that long. Back in India, back in college, I had a bunch of friends that I'd known for a really long time, and then having that familiarity feeling of people that you've known for like 4 or 5 years is a little bit different. The people that I was meeting in France, they were all completely new, so they didn't really have that familiar feeling about them. Not yet, at least. I remember not even 1 year into living in France, I got an internship opportunity in the US, in Los Angeles, and so I decided to take it. And so all of the friends that I'd even just like started building these friendships with, I had to essentially leave all of them and move oceans once again. And so I wasn't even able to make those friendships develop into something stronger. And then I lived in LA for like half a year, and when I was done with that, I had to do it all over again. Like all the friendships that I made in LA, I had to basically leave them just like after just half a year, so I couldn't let those develop into something stronger either. So I was basically just left with a whole bunch of friends in different places who I knew briefly. They were friends, but they weren't really people who I'd known for like a really long time. So wherever I was, I didn't really have any friends that were like super familiar to me. I feel like it's only now that I've lived in Paris for longer. Like I moved back to Paris in 2020 and I haven't really moved out since. So it's been basically 3 years that I've been living here full time continuously. Only now I've started to develop like a stable-ish community. And the friends that I have now are people that I've known for like quite a while. And so they do have that familiar feeling about them. But it took like 5 years of moving abroad to get to that point. And even then, some of these people I've known for like 5 years because I met them in the very beginning, and then there's other people who I've also just met pretty recently because many of my friends also left in the middle. But yeah, it's only now after 5 years that I feel like I have like a good deep support system of people that I've known a while. So it really takes quite a bit of time to get to that point. The next variable is dating. Dating is basically a whole different topic when you're a foreigner. Like at least for me, it's already so hard finding someone that I click with, and then doing that in a foreign country is just like, yeah, it's so hard. Because there's all these extra variables like, okay, you can find someone that you really click with, but then maybe they're gonna leave in 3 months, so that's not gonna work. Or maybe I found someone that I clicked with and then I left because I had to leave to LA. Or maybe I found someone in LA and then I had to leave after that. So yeah, it was just, yeah, dating is just hard, dude. Like it's just hard when you're a foreigner and you're moving around so much. And the thing is, like when you've just moved abroad, if you were in any relationship before that, you probably also just like broke up with them. So you move someplace, you're completely single, and you also can't date anyone new because of all of these different variables, and so you just don't end up dating. And I think that's probably the case for a lot of foreigners who've just moved abroad. So yeah, it's just a whole variable there. And that's what happened with me. So when I just moved to France, I broke up with my girlfriend from college, and it was hard. Like it was not easy at all to deal with that, especially with all of the distance and everything. And also combined with the fact that I just moved abroad, so I didn't really have any support system around me either. So yeah, it was just challenging, and I know that many people went through the same experience. It's only now in the last like 1-2 years or so I've been able to focus on that aspect of my life a little bit more. The next variable is life logistics, as I like to call it. These are things like setting up your apartment, getting home insurance, buying furniture, connecting with the electricity company, figuring all of that stuff out. Also solving little problems, signing your apartment lease, dealing with the landlord, all of those kinds of things. I remember one of the things that I had to deal with was like cleaning fungus on the ceiling of my bathroom, and I had no idea how to do that, and that was something that I had to figure out. These are what I call life logistics, just things that you have to do to like live your life. But the thing is, you're doing this in a new country, probably in a new language that you may not speak fully fluently, and you're doing this for the first time in your life without your parents around you or any other like adults to like help you with these things because they've done them before. So you're just figuring these things out entirely by yourself. One of these things is also like taxes. For example, my dad's really good with taxes. So back in India, he usually helped me out with my taxes. But in 2019, I had to do taxes in India, in the United States, because I interned there, and also in France. I had to do that basically by myself, like no one could help me out with that. So all of these are basically more variables, like figuring out all of these life logistics. There's all these questions like, will you be able to figure it out? How much trouble will it be? What if you do something wrong? Like there's all these questions that go on in my head when all these things have to be done. But the good thing is that this type of stuff doesn't remain like variables for too long, because once you do them once, you learn to figure it out. and then it becomes easier the next time, and then yeah, that's just how it is. It's just that the first time is a little bit complicated. The next big variable is visas and permanent residency and work permits and all of that stuff. This is something that's definitely unique to a living abroad situation. A lot of the other things I mentioned can also perhaps apply when you're like moving within your own country, but this one is particularly for when you're moving abroad. It's also for many people the most stressful part about moving abroad, because if you get this wrong, it basically means that you have to leave the country and go back home. But yeah, like dealing with visas is just, it's a big stress. One of my friends actually learned this the hard way because she chose the wrong master's degree in France and she had to leave the country at the end of it because she couldn't get the right kind of visa. And it really sucked for her. And I know many other people who are in these issues of like not being able to renew their visa and having to go back to India, or like people who moved to the US and then couldn't get the H1B and having to like essentially drop their entire life there and go back home or move to a different country. So I feel like visas can be a big source of stress for a lot of people who've moved abroad. And this is a huge variable, like whether you're gonna get the visa, you're not, what kind of visa you're gonna get, it's very uncertain. I remember when I graduated from my master's degree, I had to be very particular when finding a job because I needed to get a job with above 40,000 euros of salary, because it's only then that I would get a 4-year visa in France. And that visa was super important because it would make my life here a lot more stable. Or when I got an internship in the US, but I was pretty stressed that I wouldn't get the visa, because if I didn't get the visa, I would be completely stuck and not have any other internship to fall back on. So that was pretty stressful, especially adding to the fact that I basically got my visa back from the consulate one day, like less than one day before I took my flight out to the US. So yeah, I remember being pretty stressed about that. And now this year, I'll be applying for French nationality and I'll be applying for basically a French passport. And if I get that, that's going to remove this huge variable of work visas and permits. That's another variable in itself, whether I'm going to get it, how much trouble it's going to be, all of that stuff. The next variable is career. Building a career, especially an impactful one, is already something that's not easy, and it comes with a lot of variables, even if you're just doing it in your home country. But when you're doing it in a foreign country with a multicultural, multilingual team, there's a lot more variables that come with it. I realized that there's two routes of getting a job in France. Either I could focus only on English-speaking jobs where I didn't have to know any French at all and differentiate myself through developing more and more unique job skills, or I could be open to French jobs and have way more options, but then I'd have to level up my French skills to be able to perform as well as the average French person. I made a decision at one point to go the first route, which is focus only on English-speaking jobs, which reduced the number of jobs I could apply to, obviously, but differentiating myself through my unique skills and positioning myself in a unique way to be able to get the type of jobs that I wanted. But the downside with this is that I'm not developing my language skills as much as I would have if I did a job in French. Then the upside is that if at some point in the future, if I want to work internationally, if I want to leave France, my hypothesis is that I'll have way more job skills by then, because all the energy that I save by not having to develop my language skills, I can spend it on developing my job skills. And so that's kind of like a trade-off that I decided to make at one point. But yeah, one thing to consider is that my French level is already B2 and I can already speak French conversationally. It's just that I chose to not go beyond that in my job, or like get a job that requires me to speak French. It was also because I just wanted to play to my strengths and not my weaknesses. Obviously, speaking English is my strength. All of the other skills that I bring to the table, those are my strengths. And if I chose to get a job in French, I would be playing against my weakness, which is not being able to speak French like a French person. And so I just decided to go this route. But yeah, that's another huge variable. If you're living in an English-speaking country, this is maybe not such a huge thing to consider, but if you're living in a country in Europe, for example, this is something definitely to consider. Another variable is family. When you're living so far away from your family, it becomes extra hard to maintain close relationships with your parents, your grandparents, your siblings, or just other family members. You start to miss more and more family events, and you also start to miss the same family events every year. And in the beginning, it's okay because, like you missed Diwali back at home once, but when you miss Diwali for like 3 years, 4 years in a row, yeah, then that kind of starts to weigh down a little bit. Especially as your parents and grandparents get older and older. Maintaining these relationships, being able to spend time with your family is one more variable, and it's a pretty important variable, at least for me. Because I realized after looking at this chart that I only have limited time to spend with my parents and especially my grandparents. And I want to spend more and more time with them, at least as much as I can. So this means visiting back home more often. This is much easier when your home is close by, but when you're living 8,000 kilometers away, 9-hour flight, it's not the easiest time-wise, and it's also not the most affordable because, yeah, these long flights are expensive. So it is something to factor in when you're budgeting, when you're deciding what vacations to take, and all of that stuff. Oh, and don't forget that, like, in our 20s, we have a whole bunch of other variables already. Like I mentioned that in the beginning of this video. So those don't go away, like they're still there. And all of these variables are just in addition to those ones. But it's most likely that like the normal default 20s variables get a little bit extra complicated because of the fact that you're living in a foreign country. Honestly, sometimes I just think that life would have been way easier had I just stayed back home in India. I'd never moved abroad. I could have lived with my parents, saved a lot of money as well. Life would have been easier. Like I wouldn't really have to worry that much about like food and things, like taking care of my apartment and all of that stuff. And I could just focus completely on my career, on my social life, and maybe on my personal life as well. And also that like I'd be living in an environment which was way more familiar, way easier, no language barrier. And yeah, things would be so much easier, right? Stay till the end of the video to find out my answer for this question. But that basically brings me to my next point. What is the result of all of this? The result is that some aspects of life just have to get pushed back. There are so many variables in life now. There's just so many more moving parts because I moved abroad. And the fact is that we can only focus on a few things at once. Like we can't focus on everything. Our energy is not unlimited. And also the fact is that not all of these variables are equal in priority either. There are urgent variables to focus on at first, like getting your life admin in order. That means finding an apartment that you're safe and comfortable in, getting a decently paying job, because as a foreigner, you have to factor in all the expenses of visiting back home, and also just feeling a little bit more stable and secure and making yourself happier here because you're away from your family. And then you want to find a basic group of genuine friends and connections because you're in a faraway place and it is important to have a support system, and also just like to not feel lonely, because feeling lonely is something that's super common among people who've just moved abroad. Oh, and also like doing all of these things in a faraway country, in a foreign country with a different language, it takes way more energy than it would otherwise. And naturally, like we only have limited energy to think and focus on things. But once you're done figuring out all of these basics, your career, your apartment, your basic social circle, all of that stuff, then you have like a little bit more energy to think about other things. And as and when you get more and more energy, you have to choose between what to focus on next. You could focus on your social life, you could focus on your hobbies, you could focus on your personal life, or you could focus on your physical and mental health if that's something that you need to focus on. But yeah, we always need to focus on that. The thing is, you can't have everything and you can't have everything all at once. But as and when you focus on more things, the number of variables becomes lesser and lesser, and you have then the time and energy to focus on other things. And that's why this means that some aspects of life have to get pushed back further as compared to your friends from back home, or as compared to the locals in the country that you're living in. Your friends back home might get a head start on their careers, they might make more progress on their personal life, they might get into serious relationships, they might buy a house, and they're able to put more time into their hobbies. Maybe like they even start getting married and having kids, and all of these things can make you feel as if like, oh man, like am I behind? While all of that is happening with your friends, you're just there like at home cooking yourself pasta for the third time this week. And that's what my life was like when I was a student. Just a few years ago. And it still sometimes is. But the good thing is that even though things get pushed back, you still get them, just in a different timeline. For me, now that I've graduated, it's been almost 2 years, I've started working full time, I make a little bit more money, I've got a 4-year visa, and I've also built like a stable support system in the city. Now, the number of variables in my life is a little bit lower than it was 2 to 3 years ago, and I can focus on other things. It's only now that I can focus a bit more on my hobbies, I can focus on dating and meeting people, and I can focus on like doing cool things and making cool communities of people. And I can also focus on things like decorating my apartment, buying slightly nicer furniture. So yeah, it's like slowly I'm able to focus on all these things. Recently, I've started doing improv comedy, which has been super fun. And I've also started focusing a little bit more on guitar and on music. I've also started traveling a little bit more than I was before, so that's pretty nice too. But yeah, the thing is that all these things that I'm doing and experiencing now, I don't think I would have appreciated them as much as I do now if I didn't go through all the years of struggle before this, because it's only now that I know what it feels like to have so much uncertainty that I appreciate some amount of stability. Sure, I am a bit late on certain things as compared to my friends back home, but I also have a lot of other things going on for me right now. And of course, it's not that I've got everything. Like, there's still a lot of things that are still pushed back a little bit more, but now I've realized that I'm gonna get there on my own time. What does all of this mean? What's the point of this video? But well, here's what I want to tell you. If you're currently an expat or immigrant, whether you're here permanently or for the short term in a different country, and you're building your life from scratch and things are looking tough, whether it's in your personal life, professional life, your social life, or maybe you're even just struggling to find a purpose beyond your job, just know this. You're already dealing with way more things than you would have dealt with had you chosen to stay back home. So you need to cut yourself some slack. Remind yourself of the fact that you're not just going through your 20s, which are already a challenging time in themselves. You're doing it all by yourself, probably in a foreign country. So this means that if you're not able to give 100% to the things that you used to give 100% to before, it's okay. Or if your friends back home are way ahead of you in their personal or professional lives, it's okay. Remind yourself of all the additional things that you're dealing with. And most importantly, remind yourself of why you're doing this. Why you moved abroad in the first place. Coming back to the question of, do I think it would have been easier if my life would have been better had I just stayed home? I don't think so. Not at all. Moving abroad and exploring the world is something that I wanted to do since I was a little kid. And after 5 years here, I'm so happy with the person that I've become. I'm much more satisfied with my life, and that's because I'm doing exactly what I wanted to do. I can't even imagine what my life would have been if I had not moved to France back in 2018. And that's why I know that all of these struggles were worth it for me. Remind yourself of your reason for moving abroad. And if you're watching this video and you're just considering moving abroad right now, think about why it is that you want to move abroad. Because you'll want to remember that reason for when things get tough, and they will get tough. I guess this message that I'm telling you guys is something that I wish someone would have told me like a couple of years ago when I just moved abroad, because things were pretty hard. And yeah, just know that things are gonna get easier. I hope this video helped you out, or maybe it gave you some clarity, or maybe it gave you some inspiration, or maybe it just made you feel something. If it did, give it a like, it really helps me out a lot. And maybe consider hitting that subscribe button for more videos like this about life abroad, life as an expat, life in France. Hopefully, I'll see you guys in the next one.